Hello and welcome to WriterSpeak, a program about the written word and those who produce it. I'm Mikala Kennan, your host for today's show. With me is Alissa Hirshfeld-Flores, and she has written just a delightful, wonderful book entitled "This Whole Wide World is Just a Narrow Bridge." And it's her story. It's actually dealing with death, life, accepting circumstances, and moving on out loud, as she says.
Learning to live out loud.
Learning to live out, well, moving on. Learning to live out loud. When faced with a number of challenges and things that we don't often like to have to go through, but in fact are part of real life. So, Alissa, welcome. Glad you're with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So tell us how the book came about and the unusual title.
Okay, so I wrote it actually, I actually started to write it as my mother was very sick with cancer and declining, and ultimately worked on it after she died, completed it after she died. At that point I had worked at hospice for almost 12 years. So I had the experience of working with many other families that had gone through a family member's death. And I was the manager of the bereavement department, so my role was primarily counseling bereaved people of all ages, from children to seniors. And so going through my own grief process, I was sort of putting together what I had learned from other people about their grief experience and kind of making sense of my own. And I wanted to write the book as a way to kind of metabolize what I had learned from my experience as a grief counselor, but also what I was learning going through my mother's death and ultimately healing from my own grief.
Sure, sure. One of the reviews I read actually likened your writing to holding a looking glass to your own thoughts, emotions, and experiences. You become the observer of the observed. So was that more a process of hindsight, or were you able to, at the time you were experiencing these things, step aside and kind of monitor your feelings and thoughts?
I think the latter, and I think actually writing the book helped me to cope with my grief by being a little bit detached, observing, seeing, watching myself, watching what I was feeling, and also with what I had picked up watching other people go through their grief.
Right. You intersperse humor throughout the book. Talk a little bit about humor as a healing agent.
Well, I think humor is very much a healing agent. I work as a psychotherapist. I work with people who have gone through trauma and loss. And I think humor is very important to be able to appreciate, some of the ridiculousness of life, to laugh at ourselves, even sometimes when we're going through something difficult, to be able to look at ourselves with softness and also with humor.
Yeah, I like that term, softness. Can you give us a story or two where you used humor?
What comes to mind, I was just looking at my toes, which I painted earlier today, and I was thinking about working with a girl who had lost her stepmother, who was very beloved to her. And one of the things I do when I work with children who are grieving is ask them about where they imagine the person is. That helps them to sort of place the person somewhere in their mind, or have a visual of where they imagine the person is based on their belief system. And this girl actually imagined her stepmother in heaven, enjoying a pedicure in heaven. Oh, wow. And was able to laugh about, how much her stepmother used to like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those kinds of things are helpful little stepping stones in the process.
Exactly. I think being able to remember happy memories and also being able to remember humorous memories of the person that's been lost, but the memories of them are still with them, with us. And,
sure.
And the fun times we enjoyed are still with us in our memories.
My mother passed probably about 2 years ago, and one of the things that they included in her casket were little Butterfinger and Snickers candy bar miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
And people got the greatest kick out of thinking that she was going to take her candy with her, you know,
Mm-hmm.
wherever she was going to go. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just a fun levity producing kind of action that meant, it was actually significant and it meant a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've also acted as a grief consultant for some Hollywood films.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, the biggest film I worked on was Up, so I got to be a story consultant for the movie Up, and spent a couple of hours at Pixar being interviewed about what a senior person going through grief, what they might experience, and what their grief process might be like
Mm-hmm.
after losing a spouse of many years, and how they might be able to heal from that process. And
Sure.
I talked about one of the ways they might heal would be being able to pass on their knowledge and wisdom and love to someone in the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was interesting to see how the film developed with the man mentoring the young boy.
Uh-huh. And what is that like to stand back and see something that you've had such impactful input?
It was very exciting. I mean, the whole process was fun, it was exciting. It was interesting to be part of and to see how the writers brainstorm themselves about the story, right, and how much thought and thoughtfulness they put into developing the story.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't see that in the
Mm-hmm.
final product, do we?
No, I mean, I was very impressed by how much research they wanted to do on really understanding the grief experience, and really wanting to make it real, wanting to be able to make the experience they were depicting real in this particular character.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
When you decided that you wanted to make psychotherapy your career, did you want to channel things toward the grief and bereavement side, or did your career just kind of take you that way?
That's a good question. It did kind of take me that way. I mean, I went into it with a range of interests.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in development and developmental processes really across the lifespan. And I got into grief and loss sort of a bit by chance. I mean, I happened to do an internship at a hospice, and so I began to do bereavement counseling, first with children and then ultimately with adults and seniors. And I realized that grief counseling really brought together many areas of my interest. I mean, I was interested in counseling people through existential questions that arise, identity issues, which always come up for someone after they've had a major loss. So, and spiritual questions and interests. So it really weaved together many of what had been my interests up to that point.
And this book came about at the time when you had learned of your mother's cancer diagnosis, but you were also giving life to your daughter. What was how did you kind of balance all of those conflicting and all your experiences at that point? So many different ways to look at things, ending life, beginning life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was a very rich period, which is part of what inspired me to want to capture it somehow through writing. And just seeing that dovetailing of my daughter coming into life and just starting to develop as a person, and my mother declining, and similarities actually in how I was caring for both of them. You know, my daughter just growing and my mother getting weaker, and I think it just made me appreciate in a deeper way the awesomeness, the miracle of life, the miracle of the whole life cycle.
Did you always enjoy writing prior to any of this? Kind of a hobby writer in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've always kept journals. I wrote a lot earlier in high school and college. I wrote some professional articles. So I have always enjoyed writing. And this book, I mean, I didn't really sit down and plan, I'm going to write a book now. I was journaling my experience. And as I was journaling and working with it, I was moved to just put it together in a more organized way. And then it became kind of an obsession, I mean, kind of a passion, you know, and I found that it was helping me deal with my emotions, and so it transformed into more of a book form.
What did it do for your creativity? Did it deepen it, richen it, put you more in touch with it? You know, all the emotions building up inside you.
That's a good question. I think certainly it deepened it, it enriched. I find actually that when I'm working on a creative project, whatever it might be, writing or painting or artwork of some form, the passion and excitement for the project spills over into other areas of my life. So it gave me more energy in my clinical work with clients. It just sort of sharpened my thinking and all of that.
Do you encourage your clients to write or journal or use that form?
I do, especially when it's something that comes more naturally to them. You know, I try to find where their creative bent lies and try to encourage them, whether it's music or visual art or writing, to use some creative means to help them express and process what they're going through. And journaling, you know, journaling really lends itself to processing emotion. So I do encourage that. And actually, I wrote the book partly, or as I was in the process, I realized that it could be a good model for clients, you know, that this could be one way that they might think about processing their own traumas or losses.
Well, and I think we've kind of touched on this in a roundabout way, but I was going to ask you, what is it about writing that is so cathartic and so helpful to the healing process?
I think that I think it's a bit what you said in terms of the observer, observing the self. You know, it sort of forces you to be in that observing ego place of looking at your experience, writing about your experience. There's something about, you know, the actual putting it down on a page. It contains the experience, you know, in a way that therapy actually contains the emotions of what you're going through. But it's a way one contains them for oneself by writing it out. It's cathartic. You know, there have been many studies that show that emotional writing is cathartic and is empirically healing of all kinds of emotional trauma.
What's your thought on all the social media these days? Can one effectively use writing when they're tweeting their experience moment by moment, or?
Well, I don't tweet myself. I think that's one media form I haven't caught up to. But Facebook, you know, I think can be cathartic in that way. I mean, I've seen people write very moving, eloquent descriptions of their experience on Facebook, and I think it's cathartic for them. I think it's you know, it connects the community in a way that can be supportive and can touch other people.
And I think it's using the technology of today.
Right. Of course, it can be overdone, but I think, you know, in its place, I think it can be very helpful.
And we certainly know that there's a lot of online support that can be global when that information is out. So that can be healing as well, knowing that you've got a lot of people who are following your path and your progress and encouraging you along the way.
Absolutely. So. And there are grief-related chat rooms and Facebook groups and sites, and those can be very helpful for people that are uncomfortable with the therapy process for some reason, don't actually want to go to counseling, or are isolated or for whatever reason can't get to a support group.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your own creative process? Can you just say, goodbye, I'm going to go write for a while, or as a busy mom and a career person?
Yeah.
How do you take time for yourself?
Well, I just sort of grab those times where I can, like many working mothers or professional people. Sometimes when my daughter goes to bed, sometimes I'll have a free hour during the day. I'll just try to grab those moments. I've just recently started working on a novel, so I'm trying to carve out the space where I'm going to do it.
The discipline of it, yeah.
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 So being a mother and being a daughter at the same time who's losing a mother, what did that do to shape your self-image in terms of your own role as a mother? It was a kind of a complicated way to ask that, but I'm wondering, again, that juxtaposition of life and death, and you're the daughter who's losing a mother, but you're a mother now who has a daughter. And what did that do to help you kind of shape or redefine your thoughts of who you want to be as a mother?
That's a good question. I think that one of the processes that many of us go through when we become mothers is thinking about how we want to be similar to our own mothers, how we might want to do things differently. And I think those questions are highlighted when one is losing a mother. They were for me when I was losing my mother, to really think about, what did I learn from my mother that I want to pass on, and what were some of the mistakes she made that I want to try to do differently with my own daughter.
And your husband is a comedian, and I'm thinking, boy, you must have a lot of laughter in your house. Tell us a little bit about your daughter. She's about 9 now, is that correct?
She is. She's, yeah. Yeah.
And who is she as a little person?
She's great. I'm biased, of course, but
of course.
She's wonderful. She's a lot like my husband, actually. She's very extroverted. She has an entertainer side of herself. She's bright. She's creative. She's able to connect with many people. She's very extroverted, and I think she draws people to her, which I think is wonderful. I mean, I'm very happy for her that she has that.
And do you encourage her to write? Her journal?
Yeah, actually, she enjoys. She wrote a little book as a school project this year, which she enjoyed doing. And she actually came with me to one of my book readings, and afterwards she said, "Mom, I want to write a book together." So we're in the process of trying to figure out a theme for a book that we might write together, which I think would be great.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Julie Andrews and her daughter, Emma, have a whole series of books that are co-written as mother-daughter. So it's a wonderful goal to strive for. And it's a great way to get your daughter engaged in the creative process. So.
Right.
Excellent.
Right.
Good. Well, tell us a little bit more about your experience in putting your thoughts together and then having them actually in a completed form, like a book. This is it. This is your experience condensed. What pleasure does it give you to see that?
It's very exciting. I mean, it was, it was very exciting when I first saw the proof copy, where I first saw it together as a book. I mean, I've always wanted to write a book. It's been one of those life goals. Someday I'm going to write a book. And then when you write one, you want to write another one. The next one's going to be even better. Or if I had it to do over, I would do this differently and that differently. So it's exciting. It's sort of a time capsule of a moment in time.
Yeah.
And it's also something I can leave. I feel like, because I really put together a lot of my what I've come to believe in terms of my philosophy of living. And so it feels good to have that together in one place, and to have it as something that my daughter can read when she's even older and hopefully appreciate.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Have you thought, well, let me say this. First of all, our culture is not really taught to respect or honor the grief and loss. We don't quite know how to deal with that. Have you thought about writing something for your clients, for your people, that would benefit by having a book of how-to, based on your experience?
Well, I have written articles along those lines, how to consciously grieve, both geared towards adults and towards children. So I might write a book like that.
What is your novel that you're working on? Are you at a point where you can give us a taste of the theme?
Well, it's still very much in development, but it's a coming of age sort of novel, and it's the crossing of the paths of a young woman, 19 or 20, crossing paths, who's on a bit of a spiritual journey herself, and crossing paths with a woman in her mid-50s who I think actually will have cancer and will be going through her process around that. And so crossing of their paths and what they learn from each other.
Excellent. Anything else that you'd like to share with us about that book in particular?
Well, you asked about the title. The title is actually a quote originally in Hebrew by a famous rabbi who talked about, actually, his quote is, "This whole world is just a narrow bridge," and the end of the quote is, "And the main thing is not to fear." So to try to walk through life with faith and without fear as much as possible, which is difficult, of course, in this day and age.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
How do you talk to your young kids in particular, who may be questioning some of the cultural events that have happened, the Aurora event and some of the other things that are so much in the media and so much part of our reality these days? How do you talk to them and help them to understand?
Well, I help, when I talk to people, I want to help them find the way that they find meaning. I can tell them my ideas, but I think more important is to help people find how they come to terms with these kinds of things, how we live in a world where there are these kinds of tragedies, and allow ourselves to feel the pain of it, but also to be able to continue and go on and have faith, have faith in the world as a safe place, even when we know that it often isn't.
Sure.
To kind of hold those two in a balance. And I think everybody finds that balance in their own way, but hopefully to be able to go forward and still feel like people can live with joy and love and connection, even though we know it's passing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how you've learned to live out loud?
Sure. Well, part of what I describe in the book is that I was, when I was younger, I was very shy. I was very introverted. I would probably never do something like this. It would just be too anxiety-provoking. And I think something about being in the face of death and realizing that life is short and that life passes and that we only get so many opportunities for different experiences, it made me actually want to be more present. It made me want to throw myself more wholeheartedly into life opportunities while I could have them.
And not let them pass by, or maybe put them off until later. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you hope readers get from your book?
Well, I hope that I hope that it helps them to think about the losses that they've been through in their life, and maybe make sense of them in a different way, open to them in a different way, allow themselves to explore those experiences, to come to terms with them, and maybe even to empower them to, you know, a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about death and loss. And I think actually bringing it out into the open, being able to have a dialogue about it, is very, not only healing, but enriches life.
Because it is. It's a part of what all of us go through at one time or another. And
exactly. And to, I think facing death helps us to celebrate life even more fully. So I think that was part of my motivation behind the book, is to kind of model that idea of that we can hold both and that each can enrich the other.
And I think you've accomplished that, and I'm going to just peek here. She's got a comment from a fan of hers that says, "Really excellent, very moving and inspiring. Great job." So on that, we'll say thank you for writing this. How can people get a copy for themselves?
Well, it's available through Amazon, and it's also for people in Santa Rosa. It's at several local cafes, and it's also at Copperfields.
Thank you so much for sharing with us your story, sharing it with us in book form. Best of luck to you now as you continue on, armed with a lot of empowerment and loud living and humor in your life, and a beautiful daughter and a great husband to travel the path with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us again, and thank you for tuning in. This is WriterSpeak. I'm glad that you joined us today, and we'll see you next time.